Welcome everybody to Linux Academy. My name is Terry, and over this course we will be covering all things Linux, introduction to installation and setup. So in this video we're going to talk about the differences between Linux on the server and Linux on the desktop. Which one you will choose will depend upon what your ultimate use is going to be. And sometimes it's a more complex choice than, am I going to use email or am I going to browse the web? Or I want to write a web server that needs to be hosted in a data center somewhere. So predominantly, what's the difference between the server and desktop in any distribution? Well, let's start with the desktop. So in general, a desktop Linux is a generic term referring to a Linux installation that contains a GUI, or a graphical user interface, and a number of personal use applications. Desktop Linux is not a distribution-specific term, meaning it's the same for Red Hat Linux as it is for Ubuntu, for example, and can refer to any installation run on your personal computer. It can run on a server. Some people do use server-type systems to run desktop installations, but predominantly you'll find it on your whether it's your desktop or your workstation. Some of the common graphical user interfaces that you'll have heard of and that come on different distributions are KDE, GNOME, Unity, which is the new default desktop for Ubuntu, XFCE, which is more of a lightweight traditional X Windows desktop, and Cinnamon, which is GNOME 2 Lite, a branch of the old GNOME interface before it became GNOME 3. And when we talk about common personal use applications, we're talking about chat software like Pigeon or MSN or XIRC, Office suites, OpenOffice, StarOffice, KOffice, and the new OpenOffice branch, which is called LibreOffice, music players like Amarok, Banshee, Rhythmbox, video player, VLC being the most popular and the one that is the easiest to get almost any type of video codec playing in Linux, or Zine or MPlayer. And then of course a lot of people use Linux as a development environment for software. So integrated development environments like NetBeans, Eclipse, and Bluefish run very well on desktop Linux distributions. And again, any distribution can have a desktop Linux. So what's a server? Well, server Linux is really where Linux came into its own. The popularity was solidified in the enterprise using something called the LAMP stack. The LAMP stack is referred to as Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. These are the core pieces that run a good portion of the websites on the internet. In fact, Linux servers now represent 65% of all publicly available internet servers, web servers, and coincidentally, over 95% of all the world's supercomputers. Most supercomputers are owned and operated by educational institutions, but a good portion of them are also owned by governments and are used for a variety of things, including storage or Mars rover data processing by NASA. So what is the LAMP stack? Well, as we said, Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP is the LAMP stack, and it consists of web services, which is Apache, a database, which is MySQL, and a presentation language, or PHP. It's a scripting language like JavaScript that runs on the server and draws the pages that we see on the popular websites that use it. Some other server applications that you'll typically find in Linux are game servers. Online game servers run Linux code. For example, the game of Conan online happens to run Linux on its back-end servers. You'll also find content management as well as source code control runs on Linux servers and services like Drupal, WordPress, and then for source control, Subversion, Mercurial, Git, SourceForge, as a matter of fact, which is one of the largest online developer repositories in the United States, obviously runs everything on the back end using both Subversion and Git, and everything runs on Linux. Linux server support is official from a number of vendors like Dell and IBM on the hardware side. Oracle and Red Hat offer enterprise-ready, supportable versions of Linux that are freely available, but they offer paid support for them. So let's take a look at an example. So for Ubuntu, the differences between Ubuntu desktop and server are on the desktop. By default, it comes installed with the GNOME GUI. It also has a number of personal organizers, an Office suite, which was grown out of OpenOffice, now called LibreOffice, a full graphical installation, which you can click through very quickly and have the install started in less than 5 minutes, which we'll see in a subsequent video, as well as multimedia client applications, desktop client applications, accelerated video driver support for desktop compositing effects, and for support of games that run on Steam, for example, and internet browsing support. Whereas on the server, you'll have a server-optimized kernel, at least up to Ubuntu version 12.04. The kernel that came with the long-term support for the server version was optimized for server support, although there is no difference currently between 12.04, 12.10, and 13.04 Ubuntu desktop and kernel versions. But Apache web server support, database support, that LAMP stack that we talked about before. The command line shell, which is the default interface, LDAP for user management, command line installation, and advanced options during installation, which will support things like advanced RAID options, RAID card options, drivers that aren't normally installed with the desktop version of Linux. And it can also function as a firewall, a proxy server, and a DNS server. Now, please note that I think it's important to point out that the differences that we outline here are the default packages that come with the live CD or the bootable image that you'll install in Linux. But both of these versions, once they're installed, you can manually install and configure all of the packages and all of the services that are available for each one. So you can start with an Ubuntu desktop, but you can install a full desktop or a full version of the LAMP stack on it so that you can either do development or do small site hosting. So those are the differences between desktops and servers. My name is Terry for Linux Academy, brought to you by Pinehead TV.